Hi, I'm Mina Al Oraibi, Editor-in-Chief of The National, and I am at the Milken Summit in Abu Dhabi. Delighted to have the man himself, Mike Milken, here, and Badr Jafar.
And we're delighted to be with you.
Thank you very much. Well, we are fans of what you've been able to do, not only at the summit, but at the Institute. And one of the most important elements of what you've done is philanthropy. Badr, both of you actually have committed to the Giving Pledge. You're a well-known philanthropist. You're a more well-known philanthropist in terms of years. And you know, one of the most amazing things, Mike, is that you're as well-known for your business acumen as you are for philanthropy, because you really saw the two hand in hand. So I want to ask you about that business capitalist sense that also has a sense of giving to community, giving back. So tell us about strategic philanthropy.
Well, I'd say just as a basis of philanthropy, if you accept the belief that there will not be a great world or opportunity for your own children or your own grandchildren, unless people feel there's an opportunity for all children. Therefore, you're thinking not only about your own children, your own grandchildren, but all children. Second, you know, when people would come to see me to finance their business, sometimes when you listen to them, one, they're very charismatic, two, they have talent, but the idea they have is not a for-profit idea, but a non-profit idea. People think of philanthropy as giving money.
Right.
The major part of philanthropy is giving of yourself. And when you put a price tag on time, the amount of time that is given is more valuable than the amount of money. And so when one of my favorite books, or maybe my favorite book in the world, is a book called The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. And I don't know if you've read that book, or if you've read that book, Bonnie. But basically it's a story of a tree that keeps giving, and when you think you have nothing else to give, you can give more. And so for any single person, you don't have to be wealthy. If you have a skill, if you have ability, you can mentor someone, you can create something. And the first point I was making, there's great leaders, great entrepreneurs. Sometimes it's in for-profit, sometimes it's in non-profit.
More and more, I think it's becoming part of the same canvas, right? Because if you're starting with the challenges and the social challenges and woes, social or environmental or what there might be, there are multiple ways to identify capital intervention systems to be able to address those challenges. But I often like to think of philanthropic capital being the forgotten child of the capital system, because when we do, again, more often than not, come together to try and address those challenges, we're talking, particularly in this region, I think, but perhaps this is also a global challenge, we often refer to government capital and commercial capital. But the reality is, as more philanthropy becomes strategic in nature and focuses on system change, as opposed to simply symptomatic alleviation or symptom alleviation, there's a huge opportunity to find partners or to find partnership between these different forms of capital. And when you consider philanthropic capital often being associated with being a much more patient form of capital, it can de-risk in many cases when you think of blended financing, de-risk some of these investments in these challenges. So it is, and again, in terms of simple quantum of funds, there is a lot of philanthropic capital that finds its way into the system. Unfortunately, the majority, and I'm talking now specifically in the region, is off the radar screen. We're unable to identify the real impact that those funds are actually making, and the transparency or transparent and accountable systems aren't yet in place. But therein lies a huge opportunity, of course.
That's where the strategic part of philanthropy gets lost. I think in our part of the world, that's one of the challenges we have.
Well, when we set up the Center for Strategic Philanthropy, it was really after almost 30 years, 35 years, and seeing how much philanthropy was not productive. Mm-hmm. In some very difficult cases, philanthropy caused harm rather than helping. And also the duplication efforts. In medical research and medical science, or even in health and prevention, To give you just some examples, diabetes affects greatly the Middle East and this region, but it affects the entire world today. And just a few days ago, I opened the paper here, and there was a full page on eating less sugar, etc. So you start with the concept of what causes diabetes, and today, by reversing damage to your microbiome, by changing what you eat and drink, can we prevent diabetes or even reverse diabetes? And so if we can find solutions someplace in the world, they're applicable to everyone else in the world who has diabetes. And so you're not just going to deal with a person in Nigeria, you're going to deal with a person in the UAE or the United States or China, etc. So now if you want to address this issue, you have a child diagnosed with diabetes, or you have an adult, let's talk type 1, type 2. You're now going to set up a foundation and start, well, that probably isn't the best way to start. Let's first start by analyzing everything going on in the world. And that was the birth of the Center for Strategic Philanthropy. Before you make an investment, you're going to do analysis. What about the market? What about the demand for the product? Who are the competitors? If it's a manufacturing, how are you going to... Well, the same thing in philanthropy. If you want to be involved in diabetes, let's find out who's doing what in the world, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what have people tried before you start, and can you team up with others rather than starting yourself at all times. And I think that concept of strategic philanthropy is partnership, collaboration on a worldwide stage. And next, are you dealing with a symptom or are you dealing with the cause?
That partnership. So that requires a lot of trust, making sure that you found the right partners who will be aligned with you on the ultimate goals. So how do you make that decision?
Well, the effort first is we do a study for 3 to 6 months.
Wow.
So if you're interested in Alzheimer's, whatever the field your interest, we're going to figure out who they are, and you're going to spend time with them to make sure that your interests and objectives are aligned. They might not be. I had a friend many years ago who gave a very large contribution to study a disease which his son had. After he gave the contribution to the university, 3 months later, the university came back and said they're only going to focus on adult, not pediatric. Well, he'd already given the money, they weren't giving him back, and all their work was of not any use. So they picked the wrong partner.
But it does seem to be a bit of a dichotomy where some of the smartest business people in the world are extremely careful about impact when it comes to, say, financial return. Can also be perhaps a little bit, for lack of a better term, careless when it comes to investing with philanthropic capital. But again, therein lies, I think, a massive opportunity. A positive trend, of course, is as more money, I think, transitions from one generation to the next. I mean, it's expected that $4 trillion are going to be passed on by the top 10,000 high net worth individuals just over the next 10 years or so. The cultural shift in giving, and I think being focused on accountability and impact, is going to have a positive overall effect on the impact that philanthropic capital has. And of course, I think the fact that generation millennials, but also Generation Z, of course, are far more au fait with digital platforms that'll help them get funds directly to beneficiaries in a much more efficient way than perhaps they're doing so now.
There is a new generation that are used to responding to crowdsourcing pleas. We often get somebody saying, oh, I have a family member who's not well, could people give? So it's very immediate, and it's not this strategic of this is the cause I believe in or have a very personal connection that they want to see through. So how do you go from that mindset of feeling charity, that I want to give, I want to help, and again, like you said, it could be financial or time, to strategic philanthropy where you're saying this is a lifelong commitment or at least a multi-year commitment?
Well, I think there's a couple things you've asked in that question. Let's divide them in at least 2 parts.
Yeah.
One, the one-time or multi-year. One of the things you'd like to do with any contribution has been to determine, can this institution, this organization you're giving money to, stand on its own?
Right.
Can it be independent? And how do you withdraw if you're funding? So one of the things we let people know is we have a 5-year program. That if we're going to go into something, we might fund you for 5 years, but after 5 years, it's over. Because it's you don't want them to become dependent on you from that standpoint. So how do you disengage once you get started? Now, sometimes you might continue, but by letting them know that they're going to have to be independent in a period of time, you've set the stage. You've asked another question that's much different. And one of the areas that Badr brought up is different generations, etc. So we gave a great deal of thought to this. And we looked at our 3 children that are no longer young. They're 38 to 45. And in our family foundation, we concluded that instead of having them fight over who's going to deal with our family foundation and etc., we gave money for all 3 of them for their own foundations. And for a period of time, when essentially about 5 years ago, where they have their own foundations, and we'll let them learn what philanthropy is, let them understand these issues or not, and before we're going to make any decision who might run the family foundation. So we found that to be an excellent thing to do. They all feel responsibilities towards their foundations and responsibilities to analyze their giving. You also raised the question on crowdsourcing. So let's give a positive example on crowdsourcing. Water in Africa and concerns about water in Africa. Well, you had, charitywater.org. What was the idea? Not have your birthday party and have everyone give money for your birthday party to drill a well which might help 5,000 people. Well, for me to drill a well or you to drill a well, where are we going to drill it? How are we going to drill it? Do we have the technology? Do we have economies to scale? So if we wanted to do something, we don't know if it would work or not. By giving money to them, and whether it's crowdsourcing or not, you have someone that has a proven record of executing, knows where to drill, has reduced the cost of drilling, and is going to drill 1,000 wells, not one.
I didn't say in the Islamic community. I mean, you have a situation where, at least historically, zakat being obviously compulsory giving and sadaqah being discretionary alms giving was synonymous with community giving, where those in the community who had more would give to those in the community who had less, and the ultimate purpose of being to try and iron out inequality or promote social cohesion and social capital. But over time, for various reasons, it's become a lot more fragmented, the result of which today is one of the most generous communities of giving, 2 billion people who give between $300 billion to $1 trillion a year in aggregate. The reality, though, unfortunately, is 1 in 3 Muslims today still lives below the poverty line. So this is where I think, not necessarily crowdsourcing, but digital platforms to help to channel those funds through to causes globally, not just within the Islamic world, of course, but globally has massive potential and impact. And it may not be necessarily to causes that people at the get-go think that they are passionate about. By being able to learn about what's out there transparently, where the greatest challenges are. So there's obviously a learning sort of mode to it, but also a community mode to it, bringing the community back together to really to see how they can collectively affect change, hopefully through system change.
So I'd say 2 other points. One is it's scalable.
Right.
So if you're going to open a boutique restaurant, before you open 1,000, let's open 1. Let's see how it works. Let's see what the difficulties are. Let's see what the scalability is. Let's see about the viability, etc. And can you make 1 work before you tell me you're going to make 1,000? And I think a lot of times programs, if you would start them small and test them first. The other area that Badr talked about is this desire of giving, and still there's much need from that standpoint. And many religions and many organizations, the Mormon religion, essentially you have to buy in that you're going to give away 10% of what you make. It's built in, or tzedakah and other relations and other religions. But I think my concern here is, at what level are you a philanthropist?
Right.
It's one thing just to write a check or to give money. It's another thing to get personally involved. And I think what's unique about Badr and his family and others is, if you have a skill and you could be successful in other areas, Carnegie wrote about this, then you really have a duty in your lifetime. Do you want to create a fortune and then have someone else give it away who's maybe less competent than you, when you could use your own skills in your lifetime? And so he challenged people in a paper he wrote in the late 1800s on charity, one of the most famous papers ever written in this area. My feeling is that we should search out those who have the knowledge and support them.
You take this region now, where we've obviously embraced innovation and entrepreneurship as being really the silver bullet that we need to tackle many of the challenges, of course, socioeconomic, but also others. And we've accepted that entrepreneurship by definition is risky.
Yeah.
Many of the things that we try and many of the innovation models that we try and implement or at least deploy are going to fail.
Yeah.
But we're going to learn from that, so that the next time we do it, it'll be better and faster and cheaper. But we don't apply the same standards to the philanthropic sector. Mm-hmm. So I think if we are going to deploy large pools of capital in our lifetimes, but also in to set the standard for future generations, it's got to be done with a healthy tolerance for risk, not just risk in one's own giving, but also when you pool capital, because that comes with different levels and layers of risk.
Because when we're speaking about the region, I mean, you talk about government, you talk about the need to take risk, but at the same time, in the region, most governments have regulations that actually make it difficult to give. People get concerned, they might get in trouble for giving to something that they're not too sure about, or on the flip side, general public assumes that certain things like public health or research should be left to government. It's not our responsibility. So how do you make that cultural shift?
Look, that's a regulatory challenge. And again, talking from personal experience, it's a huge opportunity, because there are many families, many individuals who are extremely keen to institutionalize their philanthropy. But it just takes too long to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, the average time to set up and get,
Approvals.
Regulated and approved and licensed to operate charities here can be many years. So that is in itself a huge opportunity. And for historical reasons, perhaps socio-political reasons, the distrust in civil society and the role of civil society in both social as well as environmental challenges is probably where it's come from. But going forward, I think governments, including specifically, I'm talking now the UAE, identify the need to embrace philanthropic capital, to work alongside other forms of capital to tackle these challenges. And I know that there's a lot of plans in place now to try and make it a lot easier from a regulatory angle. So that's a huge positive trend. And once that happens, I think you'll see many multiples of new institutionalized philanthropic entities on the scene within a very short space of time. Again, in this region, there's another element or a layer that's particularly important to realize is, with this huge funds, I mentioned between zakat and sadaqah, between $300 billion to $1 trillion a year, it's not just about how much more impact, or in terms of the quality of impact we can generate, but also we need to make sure that money doesn't find its way, perhaps mistakenly or inadvertently, into the hands of those that might use it for destructive causes. All sorts of questions as to how these these non-state actors who are running around causing havoc. With a tiny percentage of that huge pool of capital that I just talked about, you can wreak havoc not just regionally but also globally. So there is an urgency to institutionalize and generate better systems of transparency.
Taking your philanthropy to create schools,
yes,
to teach hate, to teach discrimination, what are we teaching? And are you supporting people that are ideologues who are trying to teach our children the wrong things? It was interesting. There was a group in the United States, and we launched a program. This was the first time I think I ever faced pickets around 1978-80 to teach tolerance in the schools.
Teach
Tolerance,
yeah.
tolerance, etc., seeing the world through others' eyes. And when I went to a school, when we were launching this program, I saw pickets out there. And what were they picketing? They don't believe that you should teach tolerance in the schools. This could be taught in home, but the idea of not discriminating and being tolerant. And so they were picketing the schools where we launched this program on tolerance, and we used that to show the kids that this organization was not very tolerant.
Exactly, that's what not to do. Well, this conversation we could take for a very, very long time, but I know you both.
One more
yes,
thing
please.
If we can. And that, when we talk about strategic, and Badr has written about this, and before I met with him earlier this week, I read about a 20-page paper that he wrote the introduction to. And that is how things work together. And I just want to give you one example. So there is this explosion of diabetes in the world and obesity. And we could talk about all the reasons that it occurred. And we know now, because you can sequence the microbiome, we can tell what happens to you as an individual when you eat the wrong foods. It only takes 7 days to change your microbiome. And we've launched programs now where you can energize your immune system by energizing your microbiome. And so when you think about the environment, global warming, and everything we're in, there's a virtuous circle here.
Yes.
10 of the 20 leading causes of change in the environment, climate change, global warming, can be traced to food. 70 billion animals growing for people to eat. And so the, quote, movement to get people healthy, reduce obesity, and the technology of food today to make plants taste the same as a hamburger, etc., which we've introduced at this summit with Impossible Foods and other companies. This creates a virtuous circle. By getting into health prevention and changing what people are eating, we can energize the immune system, prevent them from getting diseases, and at the same time, reduce the problems in our atmosphere, reduce climate change, global warming, conservation. We don't have to destroy greenhouse areas in the Amazon or in Indonesia that exist. For more planning to raise more animals and food. And so this combination of the conservation movement with the health movement, we think presents one of the great opportunities for the world.
And that goes to your point about strategic, because that's thinking of the entire ecosystem. And that's how you can tackle big problems, complex problems, can only be tackled that way. But their final word for you.
Yeah, well, first of all, just to clarify something you said at the start, I'm simply a student of philanthropy, and Mike is a true professor, so learning every day, and we're truly inspiring. But a question I had perhaps to Mike, if you don't mind.
I want to make a point. There is a book that told you that professors learn from their students. Yeah. And I'm learning from Badr. So thank you.
Sir. The challenge that people are finding that philanthropy is perhaps becoming even more fragmented for various reasons and trends. One is perhaps the increased concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, but also with the advent of digital platforms, perhaps moving away from a one-to-many traditional model of philanthropy where someone very wealthy gives to a number of causes, to a many-to-one model where you have an individual who's seeking help or an organization being able to seek help from a seemingly infinite pool of individuals. How do you see that? I mean, do you see that as a challenge for the future of collaborative philanthropy? And if so, how does one overcome some of that?
let's talk about the money management business as an analogy.
Yeah.
You might be a great manager of energy assets. I might be a real estate investor. I give my money to you if I want to invest in energy. You might invest with me in real estate. So in philanthropy, what I see is the opportunity. You might have great knowledge and skill in education. I might better understand healthcare, so I will support you in education. You might support me, and I really see that. And what I see is the growth of philanthropists. What is your area of concentration? You can't be everything to everyone if you're going to make a real contribution. So either you find individuals to give money to who are experts, or you concentrate your philanthropy somewhat like a laser in one particular area. And that area might be education, that area might be geographic. And to give you an example, some people, philanthropy is focused on creating a cancer center. So I'm focused on creating a cancer center in Abu Dhabi, I'm focused on cancer center in wherever it might be in Nairobi, so that I can take care of people with cancer. I can approach cancer differently. I'm not as focused on the actual caregiving, I'm focused on the research. So therefore, I'm going to fund the entire world because I'm going to find the people with the best ideas. So there's two forms of philanthropy. One can be highly concentrated in a particular locale where you're serving a community. And the other one is focused on trying to solve a program that will affect every community. Both are worthwhile from that standpoint.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. I know that for our viewers, our readers, it will be an opportunity to understand the thinking behind strategic philanthropy, but also learn that it's not only money you give, the time you give, but it's that personal commitment. So you can give in different ways. I thank you both, and I hope to have a further conversation in the future.
We look forward to it. And what I would say to you is the UAE is a leader in many areas, and one of them is philanthropy.
Thank you.